and welcome to Practically Magick. I am your host, Courtney Pearl. I am owner of Prism Healing, and today I'm your Celtic priestess. We are going to dive into an episode today about death and grieving, and it's going to be a really important one that I have spent the last few weeks, months even, researching and preparing for, because I wanted to approach this subject with all of the wonder and respect that it deserves. And so before we begin on our main topic today, I would like to pull a card for our episode and for you, our audience. I am going to pull a card from the Storyteller's Tarot today. For those of you who can see me on YouTube, you can look and see what the deck looks like. I picked this up recently. It's a fairly new deck, so I am excited to play with it some more. And as you know, as part of the work that I do, I am a lore keeper, and I love folklore and I love mythology. And so when I saw this deck, I just had to have it, as you know how that goes. And so I'm going to pull a card for us today. Perhaps it has something to do with our episode topic, or perhaps it has something to do with you. This is our first episode back in 2025. Welcome to 2025. We have made it through the threshold. At the time I'm recording this, it is winter. And that is a perfect opportunity for us to talk about death. Winter being a symbol of death and rebirth in the spring. So today's card for today's episode is going to be the Ace of Scepters in this deck. I believe Ace of Scepters is corresponding with the Ace of Wands in the traditional tarot, but the image on the card, if you can see, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, it is the Ursa Major, the symbol of the constellation of stars, and the bear. The first thing I thought of when I saw this, though, if I remember correctly, the guidebook doesn't necessarily mention this, but I associate this card quite a bit with King Arthur. And it's interesting because I just finished a book, fiction, but very saturated with good old folklore. Read a book about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, a legend I particularly love, having come from Welsh mythology. And the word Arthur, a lot of people associate Arth as the Welsh word for bear, and believe that has a connection there to the Ursa Major, the bear in the sky, and the North Star, and the Big Dipper. And what this is saying for us, particularly in pulling this card today, this is a card of new beginnings. I would associate it more with a rebirth than I would with death. So it's interesting that this card is coming up for us today on our subject. But it does give us the impression of new beginnings, of something starting, and of creativity brewing. I want us all to be very careful. A lot of the mythical and mystic type people like myself would be giving you the same message, which is, I want you all to be very careful in New Year's. We just had New Year's, and a lot of people get caught up in the excitement of a new year, and New Year's resolutions are all the rage. You know, it's the thing to do, to come up with all of these new things you're going to do. And you're going to start January 1st or January, you're going to start doing all of these new things. You're going to start putting and implementing all of these new things into your life. This is an opportunity to say, slow down, because wintertime, and even in new beginnings, we don't want to run at something gung-ho, straight at the attack. Wintertime is an invitation to rest. And remember, winter just started. So we have essentially the next 6 weeks or longer, depending on what calendar you are using, to hunker down, to hibernate, to rest. I often joke with my neighbors and friends who live around me locally. You will know it's spring when the witch comes out of her cottage, the witch meaning me, because I do a lot of staying indoors in the winter. I have tried to get out more and just take walks in the cold and still engage with the outdoors so that I don't lose myself too much in that. But for the most part, I give myself permission to do a lot less than what I would normally do in the schedule of summer. There's a reason why our ancestors lived by the light of the sun and was more productive and active during the time when they would be planting and harvesting during the spring, summer, fall months of the year. But winter was a time to rest, to go indoors, to do indoor activities, and to do only what you can do during the daylight hours, which are far less hours than the other times of the year, obviously. Now, we have invented electricity and lights, and we can stay up late if we want to, and we can get up early. But I think that that goes against the natural rhythms of our body. And I want to bring this up because we're moving into the discussion topic of the day, which is death. And I know that this can be an uncomfortable topic, especially if you are of Northern European culture or North American culture. We have a tendency to be very closed-mouthed and taboo about death. We don't really want to look at it. We don't really want to face our own mortality too much. And when you look at the influence of religion and the spread of Christianity throughout the world, you see that a lot of covering up the idea of death with, well, if we believe in an afterlife and we believe that we can live forever, then we really don't need to even broach the topic of death or grief or loss when someone has died. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this topic in a couple of different topics, subtopics. I don't know what you want to call it, but an outline. I want to talk about it in a spiritual context of what and how we approach death. But I also want to talk about grief. I want to talk about culture, and I want to talk about acceptance. And when we talk about the spiritual aspect of it, which is more or less where I like to discuss the most as a priestess, as a spiritual person, I do want to be careful because people who often associate themselves or stick their faith to a particular dogma or religion, that tends to override the natural feelings of grief. And sometimes those feelings can get ignored. And I will talk personally about some situations that I have observed and noticed in my own culture and in my own family, and the family that I married into, that will show that there is a fine line and that there needs to be some attention brought to that. But as far as most cultures that you will see, a spiritual aspect of death is that it is like a portal, that we are going from one life to the next. That even if you were, let's say, atheist or agnostic, or didn't necessarily have a spiritual belief about a soul that goes into another realm, or that there's a heaven or another place after we die. I like that Neil Tyson deGrasse, he's a scientist who thinks in terms of science, but he explained that the energy that is our collective, that is our consciousness, that allows our body to work, it has to go somewhere after we die and our body ceases to live. We have done scientific experiments to know and understand that the body loses a certain amount of weight when the soul passes from it. So whether you want to call it a soul or a spirit doesn't really matter, but to know that there is an energy about our aliveness that leaves the body when the body passes away, and where it goes, whether it goes, to another realm or another dimension, possibly, or another timeline, or could it possibly be reallocated as energy does into the universe, as allowing new plants to grow and it's the energy that is going to provide something else to live once we've died. And I think that even when you look at it from a scientific aspect, that's still pretty magical. I mean, I don't think you have to be a necessarily spiritual person or a mystic to understand that the body does have energy that leaves and gets reallocated to different places in the universe when we die. And that allows other things to live and grow and be born. And isn't that amazing? I mean, you don't need religion or spirituality to just understand that the world is a pretty amazing place and it's pretty magical already. So we understand and we know that that's what happens. What I've gotten interested in the last few years is the sacredness around death, especially if you know death is coming soon. If someone is terminal, or if they have gotten a diagnosis or something that allows you to have time to prepare in that way, I would argue that we're all in that state, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. I'm just really, really interested and really fascinated by the absolute vulnerability and sacredness around death when it comes to a person dying and their family. I have come in contact with it a couple of times. I would like to interview them for the podcast in a future episode, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. I'm going to get that arranged. But I have talked to a death doula, and that idea is really fascinating to me. I don't know if that's ever on the horizon for myself, but as a priestess, that sounds really fascinating, to be somebody who can help facilitate death in that way, or even just be kind of that person who helps people through that situation. And a death doula is a fantastic idea. I had a doula at the birth of my sons when I was pregnant. And I remember when my grandmother was passing away, and she had an opportunity to know that she was on her way out and that she was probably going to be gone in a matter of days, and felt well enough to invite the whole family to come and say goodbye. And that experience was fascinating and difficult and beautiful all at the same time. But it reminded me a lot of a birth, because nobody knew exactly when it was happening. And we were all kind of measuring the signs of her body and her, when she began to get really sleepy and was only awake for small moments at a time. And, just different things that the hospice nurse and my aunt, who is a nurse practitioner, she was very comfortable and aware of the signs of death. So she was helping us understand, like, okay, her body is going through this. We're going to see these signs as it gets closer. So just like a woman in labor about to give birth to a new baby, you're watching the signs in a similar way, and people are gathering and people are discussing it, and people are, there's just this closeness that's created with that. And I found it to be really beautiful and a really beautiful opportunity to bond and connect with our family, much in the way a new baby can do that. But I had a doula at the birth of my sons, and it was highly recommended. I really loved, they were called Bud to Blossom, yeah, doulas, and their whole team is amazing. And they came before the birth and prepped me and helped me and went to my house and helped prep my house. And, they did all of these things to help prepare me and my husband and my family for, you're going to be bringing twin babies home from the hospital. That's going to be pretty amazing and life altering. So let's prepare. And a death doula would do the same thing. They would allow the family to converse about their feelings and express what they would want to see happen or what they don't want to see happen. The person who's going through the death, that's dying, gets to express how they would like that to go. And the death doula is like a facilitator guiding them through that in a lot of the ways a spiritual leader would do, except they're very much well trained in doing it. Whereas I think sometimes church leaders don't have the training. They just have, I guess, God appointed them to that position. So they just do something like that. I highly recommend a death doula. So I think that'd be a fantastic idea to have someone there to facilitate those conversations and to make as many things possible happen for the person who's dying to have the experience that they would want to have in passing through that portal to their next great beyond, whatever that might look like. But there is sort of an understanding in spiritual context of passing through the veil. And I know a lot of people in the mystical world or mediums or people who can feel energies like that. They can really feel when the veil is thin and when the spiritual world is closely connected with the living, or when there are certain messages coming through. I am particularly fascinated with mediums. I have met and seen and watched on TV mediums that I felt like, this feels like we're exploiting people, and this feels like we're taking advantage of people that are in a very emotional state. And I have felt and seen things that I know, and this is just according to me, we're very authentic and we're very much in the effort of helping people heal. And so I do want people to use their best discretion, their intuition on whether or not a person they're engaging with is just taking advantage of their emotional state, or whether they are helping them heal by connecting them to whatever messages need to happen in the afterlife. My experience with people passing on is that, yes, I have had what I felt were very, very direct conversations and experiences with people who've passed on to the other world. I wouldn't go around telling people that I am a medium. I just have had experiences that I do believe that anyone who's willing to practice that skill or to engage with that can get in touch with their own clair skills. So whether they're clairvoyant or clairsentient or clairaudient, or there's many different ways that you can access, excuse me, access knowledge from that other side. But I do believe that there are different dimensions or realms, or they kind of exist as different. In Reiki, they kind of talk about it as the different heavens, but sort of different levels or realms from the plane of existence that is Earth, and that exists in a higher, lighter sense. So I do think that when a soul dies or leaves their body, they go into a level of their white light selves that no longer associates with the ego and the body and their existence here on Earth. So when they want to connect or engage with someone on Earth, I think it's actually very difficult for them when they've passed through the light. And that's just using terminology that most people understand. I'm not saying for sure that this is what it's like, but they pass through that realm into the next level of consciousness. And I think that they are so much into the being of light that they become, that coming back to Earth and engaging as their ego self, looking like they looked on Earth, or even engaging with the people that they left behind, can be very difficult for them. I think that it can feel, for lack of a better term, it just feels icky. I imagine it to be more like if a person was had moved on from a very embarrassing situation but they had to go back and relive that embarrassing situation, then that's what it would feel like to come back to earth and to be in their in that realm. So I don't think that they reach out to connect very often unless it's necessary. And I do think that they do retain some essence of familiarity with their family members and loved ones. I think they do watch out for us. I think they do come to our events. I think they're very much involved. I just don't think that they slip into what would be considered, a ghost. Like we see them walking around in the clothes that they used to wear and in the way that they looked. And I don't think that they visit to give a message through a medium unless they really feel the need to, because I don't think that that's comfortable for them. And again, this is just according to my what I have researched and what I have felt. And so I do think, and I say these things because I want the larger audience to know that there is something mystical and magical about the afterlife and about leaving our earthly realm and into the next whatever we go and do. I personally do believe in reincarnation too. I believe that our soul can be like a diamond, that it has many, many, many facets to it. And that each lifetime we live, we experience things and we have challenges that allow us to, shall we say, polish or add pressure to the unpolished and maybe dull, craggly, foggy sides of our diamond. So the soul is not complete and ready to ascend to the highest kingdom of heaven or whatever you want to believe happens to us after we die. I don't believe that it's ready to do that unless we have experienced and gone through the things that we are meant to do to polish each and every facet of the diamond that is our soul. I'm using metaphors to help explain how I understand it to work. And that doesn't mean that this is based on any dogma or religion. It's just how I've experienced coming to this kind of knowledge with my own experiences and readings, things like that. But the reason I tell you all of this is to help you understand that whether it's in one lifetime here on earth or whether it's after we are reincarnated or whatever we have to do, I think that we are given many chances. I don't think it's like you live one life here on earth and that's all you get. And if your life is miserable, or if you happen to be born with like you're a sociopathic psychopath that doesn't know anything other than harming people. I know that there are people who would say, well, those people don't have a soul. They're just here to do harm to other humans. And that can be really harsh. And you can be a sociopath and not do harm to others, just so you know. I'm not saying that either. Ugh. It feels like so many different things that I could get totally blasted for. But all I'm saying is that there are people who believe that those people don't have a soul at all. And I'm saying, what if they do, but their experience of having that difficulty here on this planet and maybe spending their entire life in prison here and then dying, it might feel to the rest of us like a waste of being a human, when maybe that was just one side of the diamond of their soul that they needed to polish this time and they needed to experience something else next time. And there's karmic debt that they need to experience something. And it's a larger picture that no one human could ever have all the answers for. And that we get to another idea that I want to touch on, which is when it comes to death and the afterlife, I really, really appreciate the ideas brought by secular Buddhism, which is to be comfortable with uncertainty. A lot of people seek out religious dogma or religious ideas about what happens to us after we die because they want the certainty of like, I know for certain that if I do these things on this earth and if I'm a good person and I do the right, make the right choices and I'm worthy, I get to go and be in a heaven afterlife. I get to be in something that is reward at the end of it all and makes all the sacrifices that I had in this life worth it. The fact of the matter is that none of us really know. Even I'm sitting here telling you what I think I know or what I have felt and how I've experienced it. but I could be totally wrong. Nothing that I'm saying could be right either. It could be just as simple as the scientific explanation of our soul dissipates um into the rest of the world, and it becomes part of the energy that operates the world. And either way, that's okay. I'm not a person who, at this point in my life, at least, is walking around needing to know those answers. And I think that there is a great comfort and relief when you get to a place where you can say, I actually don't know. I don't know what happens to us after we die. I don't know if there's a soul. I don't know any of that. But is it going to change how I interact with other human beings, or how I follow rules or don't follow rules? Because all that really matters in this lifetime is that I live to be my most authentic self, and that I resonate at a frequency that is most authentic. So if I wait till the afterlife for a reward, am I really making good use and time of my life here now? And those are questions that I think are worth asking yourself. So maybe taking a book out of secular Buddhism, being more comfortable with uncertainty, is a great path forward. I want to reference in my research about death, and there is a fantastic documentary. We mentioned it in the episode I did with Tiffany Lesick, where we talked about alchemy. She knows personally, as she is a druid in the Anglesey Druid Order. She works with Christopher Hughes, who lives in Wales and is a druid. And also he was a mortician for many years there in Wales, and for working for the Queen, I believe. Not exactly sure how all that fits in, but the point is he made a documentary that's available to watch on through the Welsh television program CS4C, I think is how it goes. You can watch it for free. You just have to log in. So I will put all of this in my notes in my blog on my website for those who want to go back and reference it. But he has 4 episodes of this fantastic documentary he did called Maru Guda Chris, which is Death with Chris. It has English subtitles. He speaks in Welsh quite a bit. He speaks to the camera and everything in Welsh. So that's why I love it, learning Welsh, right? But he does a fantastic job talking about different cultures and how they deal with death. You will see in this documentary, that's why you have to check the box if you're older than 16, because you will see death. You will see dead corpses, bodies. And it's fascinating to me how different cultures have different ways of associating with death. And one thing I noticed, and I want to bring up before we talk about culture specifically, is time. That in one episode where he goes to Indonesia, he notices that in the city, when they're very close quarters, lots high density population, not a lot of space, they have to bury bodies in the cemetery on top of each other, stack them because there's so many. They are of a Muslim faith, and they need to bury their bodies very quickly after death. So that, first of all, it's very hot, very humid, very muggy and hot in Indonesia, but also because of their faith. So they have a family that they are following, that they are showing. The father of the family had died just hours ago, and they are already at the gravesite. They've already gone to the mosque, and then they go to the gravesite and they bury their father and husband within hours after his death. And the grave is covered up. The wooden plate that says their name is marking the grave. The family sits on and around the grave and they cry. And I find that really fascinating. And I wonder how much time is left to grieve, if that gives them a lot of closure really early in the grieving process so that they can move on and grieve after he's already buried and it's time to just grieve. Or in another place of the same country, in Indonesia, there's another place in the mountains where instead of burying quickly, they wait years, sometimes, before they bury the body. And the bodies are kept in sort of like coffins, but in kind of the home of where their family is living. And the family actually can sleep in a bedroom next to them. In their language, they refer to them as ill or sleeping. They don't say they're dead yet, because death for them does not officially occur until they are buried, until they have the funeral. And sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years to put together the whole funeral. And I think that's like two extreme examples of how time can be in play there. Because grief, specifically, when someone has gone through a loss of a family member, this in the healing world and the work that I do is not something that we clear like we do with a lot of other heavier emotions. At least I don't. I can't stay for any other healers that do the work that I do. But for me specifically, I never go into a session with someone who is grieving to release that grief. Grief is something that, although it does still feel very heavy in our bodies, it's a different kind of emotional experience. It's not a pain that we want to clear ourselves of, because it is along the same lines and other side of the same coin as love. We wouldn't be grieving a person even if we didn't particularly like that person. And I experienced that with some clients where they're grieving someone they didn't like or respect in their lifetime, but they're really, really struggling with their death. And I make it very clear, at least in the work that I do with clients, is we're not here to fix or clear your grief. That's not something that you're ever going to be able to be released from, because it is an important part of your living experience. And we don't heal it in the way that we are clearing it or getting rid of it. Healing in this case just means witnessing it, understanding it, and respecting it for what it is. And I think there is something really, really sacred and special about grief of a death, particularly. There's so many different types of grief. We talked about grief, when I talked about infertility, that's grieving a loss as well. But this particular grief I'm talking about is death. The grief you have after a death. It's not a pain that I or anyone or yourself can cure. And it is something that that we never want to move on from, and probably wouldn't be able to if we wanted to. I think I've heard it said to certain individuals who were grieving the loss of their loved ones, that they can get themselves ready to move on, that they can move on from it. There is a way to live your life to the fullest and most authentic and most aligned with the path you deserve to be on after a death. And that should be the goal. But it isn't about moving on from the death, because I think that there's no such thing. I think that someone's life impacting you enough for you to grieve them when they have passed the portal, passed through the veil, gone to the next world, that is a beautiful thing. So I do particularly experience death myself when someone has passed on. It feels to me like they're just in the next room. I may not be able to sit here in this room and connect with them and converse with them like when they were alive, but I don't feel like they're gone either. And that has helped me not feel like I have to grieve and get into a state of depression over their loss that would be debilitating to me in being able to live my life. And so I hope that for people who are going through the experience of grief is that you can be comforted to know that that you're very valid in grieving and will probably grieve for them your entire life. And that's like having that It's the same as having their love with you your entire life. So getting into that, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience with death and grief. And that is that I haven't particularly had to suffer the loss of someone really, really close to me, but I have been witness and observation into a family that I married into that has a very close personal relationship with grief and death. And that has given me sort of a unique experience with it. And that my husband's family have had a lot of loss, and a lot of that loss is people who were younger. Not, just elderly. So it's a different experience. Um, I have seen it go a lot of different ways. And one thing I've noticed about being connected in a family that has had to go through that many times, even before I entered the family, but then I have, been their witness and part of grieving with them when we've lost people since I joined the family. And one thing I noticed is that as a family and as part of all of the same religion, they do all live in proximity, very close together. They used to joke that it was like a compound or a commune of their family, because they all used to live in the same block. Even when children have grown up and gotten married, they've only moved in the same town. They have remained very close. My husband and I are probably the only ones that have moved farther away. Even now, we live just an hour away, an hour and 20 minutes away, and we live the furthest away of anyone in the whole family. So they live in proximity, very close to each other, but I haven't particularly seen a lot of experiences where they are close in relationship with each other. Because when we get together, a lot of conversations are typically about, what happened at church, or the neighbors, or, oh, I saw so-and-so at the store the other day, or how is your garden growing, and things like that. What I would call more surface level chitty chat than deep level conversations. My family and I are of the deep emotional and really get down into the nitty gritty of life kind of conversations. But my husband's family is not like that. Just different ways of doing things. I'm not saying anything is right or wrong or giving any judgment about that. Just they're close in proximity, not necessarily close as in vulnerable with each other. But I do notice that when tragedy strikes, and it has many times to this unfortunate family, but they have someone who passes away, and they get real close in those moments. I see them talk more openly and more vulnerably with each other as they talk about the loved one that's passed. They talk about memories they have of that person. And they only really do that in the days and weeks after the death and in preparation of the funeral and things like that. The people who have passed on in the family don't often get mentioned. Rightly so, because it's painful to talk about them and remember them when they've passed on. But I have seen that sometimes their religious beliefs are made to sort of be the answer to all the questions about death, and we should leave it at that. So unfortunately, for my husband growing up, when he had to go through experiences where his brothers passed away and his sister passed away, he has lost all of his siblings in this world. And, out of 4 children, he's the only surviving child in his family, which is pretty incredible when you think about the statistics of that. So when something like that would occur, it would often be all of the emotions and the grief around that event and the tragedy of it would be overridden by religious beliefs. So it would be like, we know what happens to us after we die. We go to church. Church has told us that we live forever if we do XYZ and we stay faithful to the church and the gospel, then we will see our family members again. And that belief was held so strong that oftentimes the actual healing that needed to happen, even like going to counseling or therapy together as a family to express emotions and grief in a healthy way, wasn't done in the past. I'm happy to say that hopefully that pattern has been broken, and that more and more as the generations, the younger generations grow, we move into a space where that's not the case. And I use that example to hopefully share with people that even if you do have a very strong religious understanding of death, that being able to energetically and logically express those things should happen outside of the realm of the religious beliefs, because that would be the most healthy way to bond over that. But as in Maru Guru Chris, the documentary, he explains that the Welsh culture, it's very much not talked about. When a person has died, they are, the corpse or the body is not shown afterwards. It's very unlikely that people would, let that be seen or public or anything like that. And that there's a very structured process as far as going through the steps to the funeral and the ceremonies and rituals that need to take place, and then the person is gone. And even grief and emotional expression is happening mostly behind closed doors. And that is a lot of what I see in the American culture too, which may be just a residual, the aftermath of the people who've immigrated from Northern Europe into America, that we brought that with us. The idea that death happens, but we don't just bury that down under a blanket and we're not going to talk about it too much. But there are a lot of cultures that give expression to death as more of a full, out there, open and honest expression of whatever feelings or whatever needs to happen. And I'm thinking, and I'm going to mention, because of my Celtic background, the keening women. When we talk about women in Celtic culture who were actually hired to go and express mourning out loud in public for a person who's died. Sometimes it was a stranger to the women because they were hired to be there to do this. But in being able to express that in a loud, actually like mournful crying, they kind of gave permission for everybody to do it, even people who maybe wouldn't have normally been that public with their emotions. So I have such amazing respect for the cultures that allow that, the cultures that encourage that. And keening women, in my opinion, is a really kind of amazing way to bring death out into the open. And in Indonesia, the one that the culture where the people waited years to do their funeral rites and things like that. It's interesting because you notice how there's one, when the funeral starts, they bring the bodies from the home that they've been in for a couple of years and they bring them out, and everybody in the village, including the women, especially the women, come and publicly mourn and cry like the keening women. They cry and, just full on public displays of emotion, crying and all that. So they do that. And then the next day, Chris comes back to the same funeral festivities. And this time they are laughing and celebrating and having drums and all kinds of things. I mean, death is not hidden away at all in some of the cultures that Chris engages with in this documentary series. Instead, death is openly expressed and very, very a regular part of life. Obviously, in the episode that he goes to Mexico, we have Dia de los Muertos, which is the Day of the Dead, it's a celebration. They have the flower petals that lead the dead from the cemetery to the homes, or a procession where they take the ofrenda and they take it to gravesite, and they wait all night at the gravesite with food and drink and wine and whatever. And they wait for their relatives to cross the veil on that one night and have a meal with them. And I think that's really beautiful, just to honor your ancestors in such a way that makes it very personal. I, for one, have adopted some of those traditions in my own family and household, where we do make an ancestor altar during Thanksgiving. It's meant for Samhain, or what would be Dia de los Muertos in Mexico. It's meant for Samhain, but I like to kind of combine different things. So rather than celebrate Thanksgiving in the traditional American sense of Thanksgiving, which I just don't really agree with celebrating, we have our feast, but we have our feast and we have our ancestor altar. We create these little luminaries with our ancestors' pictures on them, and I let the children introduce which ancestor they have. Each person gets to bring an ancestor to the table, and we say, "This is my great aunt so-and-so," or whatever, whoever it is that we brought. And we might tell a little story about them or anything that we've learned about them. And then we light a little candle, or we click the little battery on the little tea light candles that are battery operated. And we say, "Welcome so-and-so," and we put the candle in, and everyone says, "Welcome so-and-so." And we started this ever since we started doing it at Nourishing Kin at this Samhain. And I think it's a great way for my kids to personally know and understand their ancestors that have passed on before them, before they came into this world. And some of those relatives are very personally connected with them, because, as I said, my husband's family has had a lot of very tragic young deaths in one family. So my kids would never have gotten to meet, unless they met them in the preexistence, which is a whole other spiritual concept we'll save for another day. But they get to meet their uncles. They get to meet their aunt. They get to give a little hello and shout out to their grandma, my husband's mother, who's passed on, and anyone else that has passed on before that they were aware of them, and they get a close personal connection with them. And I think that is a beautiful way to let death not be something scary and taboo, but to be something that is familiar. And that is where we are going to get the last subtopic we're going to talk about, which is fear versus acceptance. I have had conversations with people who they themselves or family members of theirs will not talk about death, will not talk about it. They haven't, if they have prepared for it with a will of some kind or a trust, they don't discuss it with their family members, which I think is sad and probably not a smart or wise decision. But it makes it very difficult for their family members to prepare or give them what it is that they would want, not just after death, like as in what they would want as a funeral or what they would want to celebrate their life, but even as preparing for death. And I remember in the Secular Buddhist podcast, he mentioned a story where he had a friend that was diagnosed with a terminal illness, cancer, I think, and he had lunch with him one-on-one, and he said, "What's it like to be dying?" And his friend said, "I don't know. You tell me. What do you think? What is it like to be dying?" He says, "Just because I was diagnosed with terminal cancer doesn't mean that I'm dying before you. You could be hit by a bus tomorrow. We're all dying. We just don't know when that will be. And we have no certainties about that." And if the tragic deaths that I have seen and experienced in my husband's family have taught me anything, it's that I could have an aneurysm or something in my brain and drop dead tomorrow. What is it that I would want to leave behind? And what is it that I would want my children and my husband and my family and everyone I know what would I want them to know before I go? I would want them to know they're loved, that I loved them. Which, if I've had trouble expressing that, then I want to work on that. And I would want them to know that it's okay. That if I die, I'm okay. No matter what, even if there's nothing after this, let's say the atheists are right. There's absolutely nothing. But that's okay too, because I won't know and I won't be sad because I'll be nothing. I'll be okay. Don't worry about it and don't be afraid because I am going to be all right and you're going to be all right and it's all going to work out just fine. And if I die, that means I did all the things I was meant to do. Whatever that was, I did it. I'm done. So I'm good. And I just think that in talking about and discussing death openly with my children, it will help them have a comfort of a comfort with uncertainty that I myself have and would like to have. And that no regrets, right? I remember when I was going to England, before I left, I thought to myself, well, I'm going on a plane for a very long time. Lots of things can happen. I'm going to a foreign country. Lots of things can happen. I'm just going to sit down and write out a letter as if I don't make it back, and write a letter to my family and say all the things that I want to say to them so that they can just find the letter and I will, have my last word in. So I did. I sat down and I wrote a big old letter for my husband and my kids. It was very emotional. Of course, I cried during it, but not because I was sad or afraid, but because it was emotional. And what I recognized in writing that letter, as if I was going to die, was I don't have a whole lot to say other than I love you. And everything that you do is okay with me. And I accept you. And you can forgive me, hopefully, for anything that I did to offend you in my lifetime. And don't be sad for me, because if I die on this trip to England, I died doing something that I am absolutely thrilled to be doing, that I would love. So it was worth it. It's worth risking my life to go and do and live my life, to do things that I really, really want to do. And so when I got done, I felt great. I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel nervous. I could just go on with my life, and I didn't die. I made it back, and everything is okay for now. I remember my grandmother, the one I was talking about earlier, who was dying, and everyone got to gather around and everyone got to say their goodbyes. I remember many, many years before that, when I was just a kid, she said something that I never forgot. And she said, I'm not afraid to die because I'll get all my answers that I've ever wanted to know about anything, about the world and how it works and the universe and, God and everything. She just said, I would get all that answered. And that's pretty great. I'm excited for that. I'll be excited to have that finally. And so I can go anytime and I'll be okay. And she was still fairly young at that point. I remember she was probably only 65 when she said that. I was just a little kid. But it stuck with me because I thought to myself, my grandma is older and she will die someday. And when I thought about that, I was devastated because I love her. I loved her so much and I did not want her to go anywhere. I wanted to see her. I wanted to visit her. But when she said that, it made me feel like even when she does go, I'll be okay. I'll know she's okay because she told me she was okay with it. And that's a sort of peace and comfort I would like to give my kids. And that's how I would like to have a relationship with death. All right. In wrapping up this topic, and I know we've been at it for a while, don't even know how long this has gone, but we've covered all of the things I wanted to cover. And in wrapping up, I just want to say that life itself is full of deaths. Every winter is a death. Every time we go through something incredibly hard that makes us question everything we've ever known, that's a death. We are experiencing death in many different ways of ourselves and of our ego throughout our lives. And it's part of the calcination of alchemy, like we discussed in the alchemy episode. It's part of the process of purification that we need to go through to become our absolute philosopher's stone, authentic self, the part of us that never changes, the part of us that's the pure and whole part. And whether we get to be that after we die, or we get to experience it in little moments of heaven throughout our lives, living our lives, I do believe that. And I do know I've experienced it. And I can bet that anybody listening to me right now has experienced that too. So allow yourself to be comfortable with death. Allow yourself to face it, even when it's uncomfortable to think about. And that aging and mortality and cemeteries won't scare you when you have a really good relationship with death. And maybe seek out a death doula if you're still feeling uncomfortable. I think that'd be a great idea. All right. So to finish things up, I would like to thank Jess Blaine and Ride the Wave Media for producing and putting out this podcast. If you want to check out any of the other amazing podcasts that are available, find Ride the Wave Media on YouTube or where you get your podcasts. Many of my good friends are in my social network, are in my podcast network, and have podcasts and have been guests here on my podcast. And they have amazing content that you should seek out because it's all a little bit magical. I use Magick every day. And I hope that you use this podcast, this experience to create magic in everyday life, to strengthen your relationships, to heal, to prosper, to thrive, and to have a great 2025. You can find me and the work that I do on Prism Healing. My website is prism-healing.com. My Instagram is prism_healing. My Facebook is Courtney Pearl's Prism Healing. In any of those avenues, you can find me. You can message me questions, things that you have listened to. And please make sure that when you are watching this YouTube video or listening on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this podcast, that you like, subscribe, and even share episodes that are meaningful to you with someone you think it will help. That is why I create this content, is to help people. And if any of the content or experiences that I can put out there in the world that might help you, that is why I do this work. And if you'd like to support this podcast further, you can leave a review. You can, just liking and subscribing is actually a great way to support this podcast. But you can also become a sponsor if you would like. If you have a business and you would like me to mention or create a promotion for your business and you want to sponsor the work that we do here, reach out to us and let me know. And until next time, witches and wizards, go make magic.